Hey everyone, it is June 19th, 2025, and we are live with the latest episode of Dispatch Direct. My name is Greg Pruitt with the Idaho Dispatch. Before we get into today's stories that we're going to be discussing, please be sure to subscribe, in particular to our Rumble channel, as we have content there that you will not find in other places. So if you're not subscribed to our Rumble channel, be sure to head over and subscribe today. Additionally, Idaho Dispatch is independent. We rely on Idahoans to help support our efforts to bring you guys news that you probably won't get anywhere else. And in order to keep that going, in order to keep that moving, in order to expand that, if you want to stick it to the mainstream media, the best thing you can do is support independent journalism like the Idaho Dispatch. So if you look up at the ticker up above here, IdahoDispatch.com/support. If you're not a paying subscriber, ask yourself, if you read the Idaho Dispatch, if you follow the Idaho Dispatch, what's it worth to you? What's it worth? It's $6.97 a month or $9.97 a month, depending on how much you want to support us. There's also a yearly option for each of those levels. So it's up to you how much you want and appreciate and support the Idaho Dispatch being around. I can tell you right now, it's a lot of work. I was up really late last night. News kind of is feast or famine. Sometimes it's you're like picking and looking and trying to find something to cover, and other times you get 5 stories dumped in your lap, and that's basically what happened to me yesterday. So if you guys appreciate the work that we do, please consider subscribing today. Less than a cup of coffee these days is what it costs a month to help support the Idaho Dispatch. So I appreciate you guys tuning in and those of you who support us financially. All right, with that, I want to talk about some interesting stories. And this was kind of yesterday. I just had a plethora of stories that I was getting to. The first one would, and actually I'm going to jump over on Facebook here real quick too, to make sure we're rolling. I know it's been kind of a weird, Facebook's been really strange with Rumble. We use Rumble Post, and that part has been kind of strange for us to get to. Give me one sec here. Sorry about that. I'm trying to see if I can change my thing. I don't think I can. There was a story. So most of you guys remember last year, I want to say it was on July 4th. So it was on Independence Day. Somebody ended up burning down Representative Cornell Racer's store, his Army surplus store up in Sandpoint. And there was a lot of rumors at first that maybe a firework had landed on the building and burned it down. Well, it turns out later on, the police ended up identifying a suspect in the case. Let me grab her name real quick. Where is that story? Sorry. Yeah, again, there was just so much yesterday. Jennifer Suzanne Meyer was the suspect that they had named and eventually caught. She initially pled not guilty, and then I believe also tried to make it so that she was trying to get unfit to stand trial. So the state sent her to a hospital. She got evaluated, and they said, "Nope, you're fit to stand trial." She is a fairly well-known leftist up in the Sandpoint area. I think most of the conservatives knew who she was. Anyway, she ended up pleading guilty to burning down the building and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for burning it down. So, it was kind of interesting because if this had been, and some of the news outlets did cover this, but had this been a conservative who burned down, conservative activist who burned down a, Democrat lawmakers thing, it would have been statewide news coverage forever. And I think we all know that. So Cornell gave a statement in the court, and you can read these stories on the IdahoDispatch.com website. Cornell gave a statement on the stand in the court and just talked about how tough it's been. They do have a store reopened now in Ponderay, and how tough it's been, because they had to get a new building. He didn't own the building; he leased the building, and I believe the owner of the building wasn't gonna wasn't going to rebuild anything there at the time. And so Cornell and his family they had to replace all of the gear, all of the merchandise inside the store. And so he talked about with the judge how difficult that has been for him and his family to get that, all that stuff replaced, get a new building and everything else, on top of the stress of, your building's gone, you don't have a new store, you don't have any merchandise, and you got to replace all that stuff. The stress of trying to replace all that and feed your family, all at the same time. So we're glad to see that Cornell's got a new store up and running. So she has been sentenced to 15. Jennifer was sentenced to 15 years. I want to say 8 was fixed, 7 or 8 was fixed. And she'll be in prison for a long time. Was it worth? Now, she told the judge that it wasn't political. That had nothing to do with politics. The building was an eyesore, and she was just speeding it along its trajectory of demolishment. So I'm not sure that I believe that, but that is her claim. I don't know if there's any evidence to support that it was for political reasons, but a far left activist burns down a store that belongs to a lawmaker, and you just happen to pick that one building because you think it's an eyesore. I don't know. That's up to you guys to decide if you believe that or not. Speaking of interesting stories, so most of you, if you live up north, you know who Dan Gookin is. He is a Coeur d'Alene city council member. He made what I presume to be a joke. And here's the thing. You can make jokes, and if conservatives make jokes that are inappropriate, and they are, I should say, elected officials who are conservatives that make jokes that are inappropriate, the mainstream media, without fail, will run with that stuff. KTVB, Brian Holmes, they'll run that stuff all day long. So yesterday, and this was another story that plopped into my feed. Dan Gookin made a joke. I presume it was a joke. I guess he didn't say it was a joke. Maybe he really meant it. I guess that could be the reality, is that Dan Gookin really meant it, and if Israel could pull it off, then maybe he would. So he made a joke about Israel bombing specific locations in Kootenai County. And so somebody had shared a video of in Tehran, the main news station, or one of the main news stations, was burning down. Israel had hit it with a missile. And so somebody else had shared that video, made some commentary, and Dan Gookin made a comment and said, quote, I wonder if Israel has an extra missiles they can target to specific locations in Kootenai County. Now, that may seem benign. Dan Gookin has had a long history of battling with, members of the Kootenai Central Committee, the Republican Central Committee up there. He's, nonstop, and they don't like him. Brent Regan, the chairman, they don't like each other. There's just nonstop fighting there. This guy's a city council member, and he's running for mayor. So you have a mayoral candidate for Coeur d'Alene who is making comments about taking out, possibly people or buildings in Kootenai County, wondering if Israel has any missiles that they could take out some specific locations. First of all, dumb joke. Okay, if it's a joke, stupid as an elected official to be making those kind of jokes in light of an ongoing war that we have currently in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. So now, did he apologize? Of course not. In fact, I think what he ended up saying was, once again, the KCR, CC, and Brent Regan rushed to support anti-Semitism in Kootenai County. Huh. Okay. That's one way to look at that. One way to look at that for sure. Let me go over to the live chat, by the way. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, etc., please let me know. I'll do my best to answer those while we're live on air. If not, I'll try to come back and answer those a little bit later on. And I know the live chat does not. through Rumble Studio, so I'll have to see if it's on there. And I'll see that it's on there right now. Anyway, yeah. So again, not an appropriate joke, and this is a guy who, by the way, on multiple occasions has been like, no violence and peace and love, and we shouldn't make violent comments and violent rhetoric, and then here he is talking about, in all likelihood, he's allegedly saying that we need to use missiles to take out certain people in Kootenai County. Okay, interesting. All right. And then another story that came out, this was breaking news yesterday. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 opinion, has upheld Tennessee's ban on transgender procedures for minors. Idaho had a similar law. It has a similar law, which will now go into effect. Okay, a lot of, I want to say basically half the country, okay, most of the fully red controlled states passed a similar ban on puberty blockers and any kind of surgeries, a double mastectomy, for instance, and stuff like that. Testosterone treatment, all that kind of stuff is now banned for those who are under the age of 18. I never understood how we don't allow minors to do a lot of things as a society. You can't. Well, now you can't even smoke until you're 21. Not that you should smoke at all, because it's not good for you. But there's all sorts of restrictions on what minors can and can't do with their bodies and other stuff. And yet we were okay literally drugging these kids and giving them medications to treat a mental illness. But it's not treatment. You cannot change your gender. You can't go from male to female or female to male. That's like, if you have an issue with that, that's either you're going to have that discussion with God, or you're going to have to take it up with nature, because that's the way you were made. That's the way you were born. And allowing minors to do that always seemed really weird to me. And so, like most of I run the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. And I would say, so wait a minute here. The gun control advocates are saying you shouldn't be able to carry a gun for self-defense until you're 25. But if you want to chop off body parts permanently or take drugs that permanently alter your body, that's okay. That's totally fine. But you want to carry a gun for self-defense at 21? No, you can't do that. So the whole thing was just totally mind-blowing to me. If you guys haven't seen my interview that I did for our deep dive episode with Chloe Cole, who is a famous detransitioner. She travels the country. She's testified in front of Congress. It's a long podcast, but it's really fascinating to hear her story, what happened to her. She was, I think, 11 or 12, if I remember correctly, when she started taking drugs. Chemical drugs, hormones and puberty blockers and all that stuff, really, really young. And at 15 years old in California, got a double mastectomy. Really tragic story. And it's hard to hear, but this stuff is happening all the time right now. This stuff is happening all across the country. And, now, at least in all these red states, it's going to be prohibited. What happens in blue states will be, we'll have to see some of the legal challenges and stuff that come from blue or purple states when it comes to doing this stuff with minors. But I never, like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. Like, if you want to do that stuff as an adult, maybe even you wait until you're like 25, because a lot of people, from what I have read, by the time they're 25, they've grown out of it. I don't know if that's the right phrase. They've gotten through the social pressure to transition, and that's the thing. The whole transgender issue used to be extremely minute. Gender dysphoria, if that's what you want to call it, real gender dysphoria, where somebody really has this mental illness where they feel like they're trapped in the wrong sex. that was so extremely rare, and they treated it as a mental illness. And now it's not a mental illness, according to some in the medical community. You really are the different one. We need to affirm you, and then go ahead and just start changing your body permanently. It's total insanity, and I think honestly, our society will look back probably on this era of the United States and go, "What in the world happened? Like how did we let this happen? How was this a thing?" We like to mock the Japanese or the Germans and all the things, the horrible experiments they did on people, and even the United States did on soldiers back during World War II, and go, man, how did you let that happen? That's crazy. That's stupid. Why would you do that? And yet we embraced it, not only as individual citizens, but corporations and governments across the United States embraced this idea that said, sure, we can go ahead and target children to put them on these chemicals that change their bodies forever, and even go further by mutilating their bodies. I don't see how we're any different than all these countries way back during World War II that did these insane social and physical experiments on people. I don't see how it's much different. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys disagree with me. I don't think so, but that's I just anyway. So that was 6-3. There are still 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices that felt that was totally okay. So yeah, that's crazy. Last story is, so there on the No Kings protest day. So that was June 14th. There were 2 lawmakers who were shot in Minnesota, state lawmakers. Okay, I believe it was the Speaker of the House and another lawmaker. One was killed, one was seriously injured, and their spouses were also shot. I was writing a story about the Arsonist story in Cornell, and so typically when you read a news article, you'll see representative or senator so and so, and then their party affiliation, and then there's usually a designation for what town they're from when you're talking about state lawmakers. Now, when you get into U.S. stories and stuff, it's usually the party affiliation and then their state. Well, the easiest way for me in writing articles for the last however many years is to go to the legislative website, and each lawmaker had an address listed. I don't want to say home address. A lot of them was probably their home address, but a lot of them were, or some of them had like P.O. boxes and stuff, but it'd still be typically from the town that they're from. And so I went to go find Cornell's, Representative Razor's home address, and it wasn't there. And I was like, man, maybe I'm nuts. Maybe I'm crazy that these addresses were always there. So I started clicking on a whole bunch of names, or scrolling. I mean, looking at all these names, I'm going, they're not there. And so then I reached out to a few people I know that are on the legislative website all the time. I'm like, am I crazy? Did they take the addresses down? And I assumed they had taken it down in light of what happened in Minnesota. And there were other states like Colorado that took them off the donor rolls too. So they kind of removed a whole bunch of places where lawmakers' home addresses were listed. And so then I contacted Speaker Mike Moyle, and I said, hey, I just trying to confirm, like, that we're taken down. He goes, yep, we took them down. Here shortly, they'll have the option to put them back up if they want to. No, and I said, oh, okay. I want to make sure I wasn't nuts. So the state of Idaho, as far as I know, that was the only move that they made, was taking down their home addresses off the legislative website. It just made it a pain in the butt for me as a journalist, because now I got to figure out, okay, where does this person live? Either I'm going to have to just create my own list, which is probably what I'll do, or have to reach out to them every time I write a news article. So that would be kind of a pain. Scott Jones over on YouTube, this is going back to the transgender surgery story, said, it's a shame what people are allowing their children to do to themselves when their bodies are still changing. Such a confusing time without people telling them it's okay to transition, pure evil. So a couple things there. Most people on all sides of this issue seem to agree that the brain does not fully develop until you're about 25, which is when, by the way, the liberals said that you should be able to carry a gun for self-defense. And so it's interesting because their own scientific community agrees that your brain is not fully developed until you're 25, and yet we are going to say, go ahead and do these things to your body at 9, 10, 12, earlier, a little bit later. I don't know, but they're like, oh, yeah, little Jimmy, he was 4 years old and he played with his sister's Barbie one day. Let's put him on puberty blockers. It's freaking crazy. I just don't get it. So, yeah, definitely a confusing time for people. I asked Chloe Cole, what it's kind of like, what do you need? What did you need? What would have made a difference? And she goes, really, I just needed someone to love me and someone to give me time. I needed time. And what she's referencing is time to grow out of that phase, because it wasn't long after Chloe had her double mastectomy that she says, I realized I made a horrible mistake. All of a sudden, I want to have kids, and now I'm looking down. I don't have any breasts to breastfeed my children when I have children. And so she's just devastated by what happened to her. So, yeah, to that end, I'm surprised that more people aren't, or how many people were okay with this whole transgender thing with minors. It's kind of mind blowing, and I think that we're seeing that leave now. I think a lot of people, even on the left, are going, okay, this is stupid. We can't keep doing this. So hopefully, I would hope within a few years that has gone, and we are no longer experimenting on our children with chemicals and surgeries. So anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. I could not figure out the Facebook thing, so I'm gonna have to keep working on that and figure out how to get it. The first episode I did, it linked up fine, and now it's not linked up anymore, and I have no idea why. So anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and again, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. Take care. God bless.